what does consumption and food mean to you, and what do you want it to mean to you? Because sometimes we get so conditioned around things, but we don't take the time to say, what do I really feel about this? Maybe I actually don't see food as like an avenue for celebration. It's just been so indoctrinated into me that I just adopted it. But maybe celebration actually is fill in the blank. Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm so glad you're here. I'm your host, Tosca DiMatteo, and this is episode number 59. It's part of the Inner Critic series, and this one is about you shouldn't eat that. Yes, we're going to be talking about the food inner critic that so many of us have. And look, I know this topic can be and might be triggering for some, but I think it's so important. And frankly, I've been doing this podcast for over a year and a half, and I'm surprised I haven't gotten to it yet. And listen, as I started to prepare for this episode, let me tell you, I realize I have a lot to say about it, and I know it's not all going to fit neatly into this conversation, but my hope is that for you, it will provide some tools and some validation for your own experiences with this inner critic. Before I jump in, if you're new to the podcast, let me just say thank you for being here. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Tosca DiMatteo, and I'm the founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting. And I do the work at the intersection of personal growth and professional breakthroughs. So whether you're looking for a keynote speaker for your event, whether you're looking for one-on-one coaching, or perhaps even team facilitation, conversations, or masterclasses, I would love to be able to support you in getting to that next level that you're looking for. To learn more, visit CoachTosca.com. That's CoachTosca.com. All right, jumping back into this topic that is, I think prevalent for so many, this idea of our food inner critic, the voice that tells us things like, you shouldn't eat that. Now, let me just start with a disclaimer. I don't normally do disclaimers. I think this is my first one, but I just want to be clear that I am not an expert in any kind of nutrition, eating disorders, or related topics, body dysmorphia, anything like that. But I am someone who has struggled with my food inner critic for much of my life. And this episode is an attempt to bring to light this inner critic that is so prevalent for so many people, as I said, for myself included. My hope is that you can start to shift your relationship with this inner critic, because this inner critic often comes with really hard feelings and emotions. And I don't think that we have to live our lives with this, that there are things that we can do. We can completely shift this and have a better relationship with this part of ourselves and a better relationship with food in general. And here we are, we're kind of deeper into spring, we're creeping into summer months. So maybe this episode will be right on time for you to enjoy the season of sun and deliciousness. Of course, I don't know. What am I talking about? I think every season is delicious. I freaking love food. So look, this food inner critic that I'm going to talk about today is so closely linked to body image inner critics, right? How we see our bodies and what we tell ourselves about our bodies or what's going to happen with our bodies. And so I just want to name that as well. And there are also really strong values that are connected to our food inner critic. So whether they're cultural or moral, there's just a lot of depth to this. And I just want to acknowledge that. And I think that sometimes we don't think necessarily about these deeply rooted cultural beliefs that are associated with food. And of course, the moral pieces of it, whether we're talking about meat or no meat, or plants or no plants, related to the earth, all the things, right? Some of it can get into religious beliefs and things of that nature, right? So like I said, I'm speaking to you from my personal experience, and my hope is that it doesn't trigger you, but I know that sometimes it can, inadvertently. There's a lot of different opinions about these topics, and there's a lot of judgments. And I want to tell you why I have an intimate experience with this very loud, ever-present inner critic. The first of which is that I did grow up in a household with a very loud, strong history of food and body shaming. And I know I'm not alone in this. I grew up with a lot of messages around what is okay, what's not okay, around food. and relatedly, what's okay and not okay around body type and things of that nature. The second piece of why I'm really intimate with this topic and have done a lot of work around it is because at the age of 22, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And if I'm super honest with you, I didn't have a lot of support around how to manage type 1, what it meant. So I spent a lot of years thinking that nothing was good that I could eat. For those of you who are unfamiliar, type 1 diabetes is when you do not produce insulin anymore. And therefore, to process any kind of carbohydrate, anything at all, you need to be taking synthetic insulin, which is what I have to do. You have to be very aware of what you're eating so that you can give yourself the proper medication. And there are definitely certain foods that are just really, really hard to process, especially when it comes to quantities of food. So, as you can imagine, donuts are terrible. But it's not just the carbohydrates, it's also taking other things into consideration, like fat content. So, things that are fried have an impact on how insulin is absorbed into your body. Now, I'm not trying to make this a whole education about what this is, but I say this to say that there is a lot of factors that go into how do you manage this disease, and therefore, what are the best options for what you consume. And you can imagine this can cause an inner critic to come in real quick and tell you all kinds of things about what you should and shouldn't be doing, regardless of the science. Okay. So I just want to give you a little bit of, hey, this is why I've done a lot of work around food inner critic stuff. Okay, so let's just get a little bit into it then. So what does the food inner critic sound like? This part of you that says things like you shouldn't eat that, right? Fill in the blank. You shouldn't eat that hamburger. You shouldn't eat those fries. You shouldn't eat that ice cream. You shouldn't have that donut. You shouldn't have that bagel, whatever. This inner critic also may tell you, hey, that's not a responsible decision. You're being reckless. This inner critic can also tell you that's terrible for you. It may also say you're going to feel fat if you eat that. You catching my drift? So, as with all inner critics, if you hear a you need to or you should or if you hear definitive things like this is what's going to happen if you do that, great signs that it's your inner critic talking. Now, the inner critic can also take up a lot of energy and mind space, and it could tell you things like, hey, don't buy that. It could also be hyper focused on what are you going to have for your next meal. And the inner critic can also just come with feelings of guilt or shame when it comes to you consuming. So you may not hear these kinds of messages come through, but you may feel a certain way if you choose to have that dessert after dinner. Let me tell you, if this inner critic is running your life, let me be the first one to say it doesn't have to. And I know that if you've been living decades on this planet with these voices in your head, you may think this is just the way it is. I don't believe that. That's why I do the work that I do, because I believe you can shift your relationship with this part of you and with this inner critic. Now, while I will be sharing with you some of my top tips around how to quiet and shift your relationship with this inner critic, there is so much other professional help that you may need around this. And my hope is that whatever you choose not to suffer from these thoughts anymore, and you get support that you feel like you need to help you once and for all shift things. Now, here's the thing about food and consumption. They're often triggers, right? They trigger other inner critics within us, and they can be very linked to other traumas or experiences and bring up other types of things. So I just want to name that too. Like sometimes they can be connected to other things. So, for example, for me, the food inner critic can be a trigger of not belonging. So, for example, as someone who I cannot eat like refined sugar, like sugar in my coffee, right? Really can't do that. So, if I'm going to a coffee shop and they don't have stevia or Splenda or some sugar alternative, it can make me feel like I don't belong. I mean, it may sound crazy, but definitely early on in my experiences, when I would go to these places that had different philosophies about food, I would go there and say, what the hell? This place doesn't accept, doesn't support people like me who can't have sugar, right? Or places that only have carby things. It can be a trigger around when people ask about allergies, but not about dietary restrictions or needs. And it can also be a trigger when there's experts, right, in the health, wellness, nutrition space, but they can't really support me because they don't have the specific knowledge around type 1. And once again, it can make me feel like I'm an outlier. Like, why is this happening? Why can't I get support? Why does it have to be such a process to find people that can actually support me to either make better decisions or to get the knowledge that I need, et cetera, et cetera. So I just, I bring this up as, my examples of how this can be triggering in other ways other than the body shaming and other than the health related pieces. There are two very big ahas I think that I want to just share up front before I get into these tips around how do you start to shift things. And I want to share these two big ahas in hopes that it supports you, whether it's validating to you or whether it gives you some ideas for how you can support yourself or get what you need. The first thing I want to share is that when I was 40, I was planning a big celebration in Italy. I was so excited. I had been thinking about it for a year and it was getting closer and closer to the time that I was celebrating. And I happened to engage with a nutritionist at that time. I don't always have regular conversations with nutritionists, but once in a while, I feel like I need some more support. I need some ideas. And I was working with a woman at the time who deeply understood type 1 because she had kids with it. So she understood that it wasn't just a physical thing, but it was also a psychological thing that you deal with. And one of the things she told me, and it was literally, I think the first time in my life I'd ever heard this. Because what I was doing was I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to Italy. There's pasta. I freaking love pasta. Hello. I have an Italian heritage. Like, what am I going to do? There's going to be gelato. Like, there was this part of me that felt like I was going to be tortured out there. And this nutritionist said, oh my gosh, honey, don't be so hard on yourself. That's what your medicine is for. She said to me, go and eat what you want. Enjoy your birthday. Wow. Wow. To be honest, like this moment of giving myself permission without beating myself up was a turning point in my relationship with my food inner critic. That I realized this was just another way in my life that I was beating myself up. I had done it in other areas of my life, whether it was my career, whatever. I share this story to say, oh my gosh, it was a big awareness of like what I was doing to myself that was unnecessary. And it was also this idea of what is the permission slip that you may need in your life as it relates to this inner critic. And of course, I didn't go to Italy and I wasn't reckless because there is a reality to what I can and can't do. But I just let it all go about beating myself up and was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I want the tagliatelle, like, yeah, I want the gelato at the freaking fountain, the Trivoli. I think I'm saying it right. I can't remember. Anyway, you know what I'm saying? Like I did the things and gave myself permission to enjoy it versus be in conflict in those moments. Okay, so that was kind of the first aha I wanted to share. That was a pivotal moment for me. I want to take a pause from this episode and share with you a word from our sponsor, the New Body Project. How apropos for this conversation because the New Body Project is Brooklyn's first and only all women's boutique fitness studio that's changing lives one class at a time. I can certainly attest to this as I have been a member for years. It helps me feel good in my body, not just because I'm moving my body, but because of the community that is a part of what this experience is all about. So, whether you are just starting out your fitness journey or wanting to level up, they've got expert trainers, several different class types, and the kind of motivation that sticks. It's not just about looking good, but it's about feeling unstoppable and doing it around a group of like minded women who want to connect with you. To learn more about this community and this boot camp, please visit thenewbodyproject.com. Use the code Tosca to unlock a free week of unlimited classes with a purchase of your trial class and consultation. All right, back to regularly scheduled programming. Okay, so the second kind of big aha I wanted to share is that there can be big feelings of betrayal when it comes to this topic. And I think sometimes just being able to name the feeling or name, oh my gosh, this is what's going on, can be really, really healing and eye opening. So, for example, if someone is unwilling to accommodate for your dietary needs, that can really lead to a sense of betrayal. So, for example, maybe you are vegan or vegetarian, or maybe you need certain ingredients to be swapped out, and somebody's unwilling to support you in finding those solutions, especially people that are close to you. That can feel like betrayal, but it can be hard to understand that that's what you're experiencing. Look, I think there's definitely, again, this is where some of that cultural stuff comes in and other types of dynamics that go on, whether it's family environments or otherwise, that you can have this deep sense of betrayal, but maybe it's hard to understand what that is. So I just want to also name that in case this is something that is helpful for you to hear. All right. So, how do we actually shift our relationship with this inner critic? Gosh, it can be so intertwined. You've probably heard me say this before if you've listened to this podcast, which is that the longer that we're dealing with our inner critics and not addressing them and not shifting our relationship, the harder it is to see the truth of what's inner critic versus our actual essence. The very first thing, as I share with all inner critic work, is to really pay attention to what you're saying to yourself. Become acutely aware of what you say to yourself. Maybe it's when you're shopping, maybe it's when you're eating, maybe it's when you're thinking about eating, maybe it's when you're thinking about the party that's coming up, like all the things, to really pay attention to it. And as I always recommend, journal about it. Because when you're putting it to paper and you're seeing the prevalence of it, you can be like, oh, wow, that's happening a lot. When I did this exercise for myself, and I've done it a few times in my life of just like paying attention to what I'm saying to myself, like it's like, oh my gosh, I'm in the shower and my food inner critic is coming in telling me I shouldn't have ate that thing last night. Like it's crazy town. Going grocery shopping and seeing all the things that I'm really not supposed to have, like my food inner critic can get involved even when I'm not even eating, but I'm shopping, right? So like really pay attention. Paying attention can lead to a shift for a few reasons. It can lead to a shift because it becomes easier to make a new choice about what you want to say to yourself instead. But it can also help you realize, how are you draining your own energy or your own life force by saying things that are unkind or untrue? And so that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of counsel is to not engage in any food shaming with anyone else. Now, we might have these deeply embedded behaviors where we're basically projecting our issues onto others. And in my own life, I have had to explicitly shift some behaviors and had to explicitly state in certain conversations, like, I'm not engaging in this food shaming conversation. Now, I have been in situations where I explicitly state this and I name what's been going on and what's happening in the conversation. And there's just been conversations where I just opt out and just don't say anything because it can be easy to fall into that trap. It's such a social thing, right? So I think this is a really big way that we can shift our relationship when we're engaging in conversations with other people, because usually what's happening is it's our inner critic that's engaging in these conversations with other people where there's projection and where there's judgment and things of that nature. So that's my second piece of advice. Okay, the third thing is to really understand what food means to you. What does it mean to you? Is it an expression of love? Like I said, I come from an Italian household. Food is love, right? And like, I kind of knew this, right, growing up. But like, as I've deepened my work with this inner critic and given all the food challenges, but being type 1 diabetic, like, wow, I really see this big significance in my life. And by understanding that, I can make new choices too about what I want it to mean or when I want to engage in that value and that meaning, and when I want to say, no, I don't want food to be love in this situation. For example, I'll often bring desserts to other people's houses, right? Even though like I may not be able to partake myself. But again, it's just so deeply embedded that food is love and it's an expression of caring and it's what we often bring to hosts. But I may decide, for example, to say, you know what, I'm going to bring flowers instead. That's going to be my expression of love. And that can be really helpful because you're shifting it within yourself. Another, for example, thing that food often means to me is that it's an avenue for celebration. So it's like, oh, how are you going to celebrate? Because you know, I'm really big on celebrating our wins, the big ones, the small ones. I have a whole podcast episode on that. It's an early one and it's called What Celebration Got to Do with It. But anyway, I digress, right? Food is often a way that we celebrate. We celebrate with desserts, we celebrate with drinks, we celebrate with food that we wouldn't normally eat. And maybe that's fancy food, maybe it's high carb food, whatever. Part of understanding, well, what does food really mean to you? Then you can start to say, well, where do I want to make shifts around that? So, for example, when it comes to celebration, I've actually had to sit down and write a list and say, how else can I celebrate outside of consumption, right? That might mean I'm watching a Netflix show. Maybe I'm giving myself permission to like read a chapter of my book before bed, like whatever. But what this does is it allows me to shift that relationship with the inner critic that wants to intervene in everything. I'm hoping this is making sense to you to really understand what does consumption and food mean to you and what do you want it to mean to you? Because sometimes we just get so habitual, we get so conditioned around things, but we don't take the time to say, huh, what do I really feel about this? Maybe I actually don't see food as like an avenue for celebration. It's just been so indoctrinated into me that I just adopted it. But maybe celebration actually is fill in the blank. All right, I think you're picking up what I'm putting down. As you can imagine, journaling is a great way of better understanding what's going on internally, which I've already talked about. But here's a few additional journaling questions so that you can get under the surface of what has become so instinctual and habitualized. You can ask yourself, what are your beliefs around food? What are your beliefs around what it is, what it represents in your life? And then you can ask yourself, what do you want your relationship with food to be? Right? Because our inner critic has a certain relationship with it. And we get to ask ourselves, well, what do I actually want? There was a point in my life where this inner critic was just all consuming, taking up so much energy. And my relationship with food felt heavy, right? Because my inner critic was making it feel heavy. And I realized I wanted it to feel lighter. So once I started with that entry point of, oh, I want this relationship to feel lighter, I can start making new decisions about what that meant, about what did I do? What did I say to myself? What actions did I take that were different to help my relationship feel lighter? Related to this, you can ask yourself, what new mantra or affirmation do you want to adopt? So, for example, maybe that mantra is, I am allowed to make choices that are best for me. And that will help the inner critic stay out of the conversation. Another tip around how to shift your relationship with this inner critic is to ask yourself, what needs do I have around this inner critic? For example, because my inner critic at one point in my life was getting really loud in everything, in every which way. At one point, I really just needed my husband to do the heavy lifting on the grocery shopping. I needed to take that off my to do list as a way to like avoid that situation for a period of time while I was trying to make things feel lighter. Another thing that I needed that I recognized was that I needed to remove certain things from the house because it was such a temptation for me. And I knew that I wanted certain experiences to feel more special. So maybe when I was at a restaurant or whatever. And so I needed to be more choiceful around things that I didn't bring into the house that served as temptations. And that's when my inner critic would get really loud because I would have this internal battle of, I want this, but I don't want to have it. And by just removing it, I just was able to remove that tension and deal with it differently. other needs, you can ask yourself, like, what support or what accountability might you need around this? Maybe you need some education if things are complicated for you. So, like, for example, when I was first diagnosed, I didn't have really much support at all in terms of nutritionists, in terms of education. And for a long time, I kept saying to myself, well, I shouldn't have hamburgers, hamburgers, because we all know, right? Hamburgers are like full of fat and they're bad for you. It's red meat, blah, blah, blah. But really, compared to so many other things like pasta, something like a hamburger could be a great option for me. But it really wasn't until like I heard these words from a nutritionist that it sunk in of like, what's the truth around what works for me and what doesn't work for me. Gosh, there's so many other tools, there's so many other actions that I can offer around this type of thing because there's different things that we can do to shift things that are physical as well. For me, moving around and getting movement is a way that I can shift my relationship with my inner critic. But what I really wanted to focus on today is investigating really the relationship you have with this inner critic, the relationship that you have with food, the historical things that you've learned, that you've absorbed, whether it's through your family line, your culture, society, like what has been indoctrinated into you that's not serving you, that you want to shift. That's what the crux of what I'm trying to support you with today is around investigating that relationship in the deepest way, hopefully the most deep way that you have to date in your life, because I think that will help you get unstuck to take the next step. What I want to leave you with really is that this topic is complex. It's challenging. It can be challenging to navigate. We have so many messages in the world around this. There's so much projection from others, and only you are going to know what works for you. And I do think that understanding what you're saying to yourself is a wonderful gateway to whatever else you may need around it. And if there's anything that I can do to support you, please reach out. All my contact information is in the show notes. Woo! This was a big one. And I'm so glad you stuck with it. And I'm so glad you're here. And I am just wishing you all the best in finding joy and levity in this food that is available to us on earth. And I hope that you find your way to feel at peace and not in conflict with it, as I know how hard it can be to be in conflict with food and beverage. I want you to enjoy it. And I want that inner critic of yours to take a hike and take a really great vacation. Love you so much. So glad you're here. And until next time, ciao for now.